Welcome to episode 7 of Audiovisual Cultures. I'm the host and creator Paula Blair. Thanks to my former student Christy Smith for listening and for getting in touch with website recommendations in response to the discussion of colour palettes in Lost in Translation a few weeks back. These are given in the episode text if you'd like to pursue this kind of analytical approach further. If you'd like to share information, be part of the discussion, or would like to be involved in recording an episode, email audiovisualcultures, and that's all one word, all lowercase, audiovisualcultures@gmail.com. This week I continue the post-screening discussions of Sofia Coppola's films with Shail, and this time we're looking at Marie Antoinette. Enjoy the discussion, and I'll be back with more information at the end. Disappointed because all these years of not seeing Marie Antoinette, I thought it was going to be this raucous punk rock mashup culture kind of movie, and it was actually pretty tame.
Maybe we shouldn't have seen it, then we could have continued to think it would be a raucous mashup pop cult piece of business. Though, interest of balance, it did have some raucous moments, some pop cult moments, some mashup moments, but I think as mashups go,
really mild.
It hadn't turned its amps up to 11.
Barely got to 3.
I think perhaps the moment with the Converse All-Stars is...
I literally looked away for a second and missed it.
That was it, that was the illuminating moment. I knew to look for it because I'd googled it beforehand, because I heard about it.
But
it was one shot, total duration of about 2 seconds. That was it.
Not even, I think. But your student had emailed you all the drinking games to play with this, and I thought, gosh, you'd get hammered on that. No.
Shout out to my student who will remain anonymous. She could sense that academics need to have more fun, so sent me a drinking game which was to down one's drink every time. Oh, I can't remember. She did specify that it would be Prosecco that one would be drinking.
And who can afford that?
It's the not very poor person's champagne.
I think it's very pleasurable to watch.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the experience of watching it, although I did feel like probably dragged a little bit. A lot of it was just pretty images put together, and then very mild, very tiny, subtle hints at, the rest of the country's not really having a fun time.
Before we dive into this, let's inform our audience who haven't worked out yet what we just saw.
Well, I did mention Marie Antoinette.
Directed by whom and based on what and released in when?
This is the 4th in our Sofia Coppola run, isn't it?
Going for the burn.
Or sporadic.
And one can go for the burn on Sofia Coppola, since she has directed only 6 commercial feature films. So we're getting there. 2006, based on a biography by Antonia Fraser. And seemingly, what with it having this rather episodic structure that goes, we're going to tell you about a little bit that happened in her life, and then we're going to skip forwards 2 years and tell you about a little bit of something else that happened in her life, and we're going to introduce a new character, and then we're going to let that character go after 2 minutes. Based on all that business, seemingly quite closely adapting Antonia Fraser's biography, which I haven't read, and presumably you haven't either.
No, I think the extent of my knowledge on the run-up to the French Revolution is the Carry On film.
Yeah, and my historical knowledge is barely better.
Yeah, and I proofread a PhD a few years ago that was about visual culture around the French Revolution, so the etchings and the satirical drawings and things that were being printed. And I learnt a lot from that, which I've, of course, entirely forgotten.
I suppose we ought to point out that we have a fire going, so hence the crackling and popping. Because even though it's the 2nd day of spring, it's still quite chilly. So we've watched 4 Coppola films in about that many weeks, and patterns are, of course, emerging with quite some strength now. They were already emerging when we'd seen 2 of them, but now they're pretty clear.
Yeah.
I found myself at several points going, whose daughter is this? Am I just remembering Kubrick's films, but thinking that they're Francis Ford Coppola's films, and that's why this is all quite familiar stuff from all the Kubrick films I've seen, because actually they weren't directed by Kubrick, they were directed by Coppola. No, none of that. Sofia Coppola overtly says that one of her influences is Stanley Kubrick. So lots of still shots in this, lots of central compositions,
framing,
characters right in the middle of the frame, and lots of shots where the vanishing point of perspective is visible within the frame. frame, so all very Kubrick-esque.
I find that there's those slow dolly-in movements or slow zooms in as well. They kept happening all the way through Marie Antoinette, and I kept thinking of A Clockwork Orange.
I think that when it was going inwards, it was almost always a dolly. And when it was going backwards, more often than not, it was a zoom. The pattern we tend to see across a lot of Sofia Coppola's films is permitting the camera to dwell quite some distance away from her main characters. So an average camera distance that's relatively non-intimate. But then at certain moments in this particular film, there was some quite serious intimacy, particularly that one moment where Kirsten Dunst's Marie Antoinette breaks down under the pressure of having not being pregnant, which needs some discussing. And in that shot, the camera is right up in her face. In fact, there's a kind of anxiety which for a film scholar comes with that kind of cinematography where the camera's that close up to, and it's handheld too, that close up to a character and the camera's moving a bit and the character's moving a bit, where the camera and the camera operator become a bit of a hazard to the light that's being shed onto the character performer, because get that camera close up enough and it will start to cast quite a conspicuous shadow on what it's filming, and that happened at a couple of points in those few shots. There's another part of Coppola's overall look. It's fine to make one's viewer at least dimly aware that there is a camera that's doing the work of getting this set of images to you. And the very first shot of the entire film is what we might call an emblematic shot. It's just our main character in a relatively abstract environment, not doing much. They're just a sample of what's to come, and in that shot she looks straight at the camera. I've been doing a lot of work on emblematic shots in early cinema, and that was the main thing about those emblematic shots, was that the character would look straight at the camera. So an acknowledgement of the existence of the camera there. The zooms, of course, were also quite a technology-redolent activity. Whenever these zooms occurred, there was an evoking of there being a camera, giving one access to the story space.
Well, there were parts that I found were quite documentary-like in that reflexivity with the camera, particularly for me, when Marie Antoinette is in the garden with her daughter, who's a toddler at the time. It felt very naturalistic. It felt like I was watching Kirsten Dunst with this little girl, and Kirsten Dunst is speaking English, and this little 2 or 3 year old child was speaking French.
Very cute.
And was absolutely beautiful, and it felt very natural. It was a really lovely, tender moment between these two girls, women. At that moment, I felt like it was like observational documentary almost. And that part where everybody's gossiping about her, and you keep hearing this whittering on the soundtrack, but you're not seeing who's connected to the voices. She's having to rush past all this. She's upset because Louis' brother's wife has just given birth, and that's why she's upset, and she runs off. This is someone who is not permitted any privacy. There's multiple moments when Marie Antoinette and several of her friends and her daughter Marie-Thérèse, when they're collecting eggs, they're out in unmown grass, they're in what looks like a small farm. It's like a little constructed farm with workers, labourers. And it's seemingly constructed specifically for her in the gardens of the Palace of Versailles. Those were one of the few moments when the lighting was so low key as to let some bits of the shot be completely dark, and that included a bit when they were going through a passageway made out of hedges as well. That moment, it did seem to get quite documentary. This is Sofia Coppola, who tends not to let her camera move much, and she was letting it move quite a lot in this, particularly when there was partying going on. Her achieving a bunch of teen or young adult mates with whom she could party seemed to be quite a moment of success for this character. We must discuss that this is a film which, while it ends on the consequences of her lifestyle, does two things in addition. The first is not showing us any of the poverty of the French people until something like 5 minutes before the film is don't over. See any poverty, you just see a generic crowd with pitchforks. Even when we get to see it, it's quite just unimaginative. Here are some poor people. But the camera's in with them, and it's a handheld camera, it's in with the crowd looking up at her. But you just said the camera doesn't move, but the whole way through Lost in Translation you were marvelling at how little the camera stayed still. So it depends on the film, and the movement is suited to the character or characters that you're following. Because there was a lot of stillness in the Virgin Suicides, because this was about teenage girls lying around and being housebound. This time, this is someone who's housebound, but she needs release, and she's trying to do things, and she's active in some ways, and she's prevented from being active in other ways. There's a frustration, probably, I think, in the camera. So there's this free roving camera, but yet it's still tethered to something. There's still a viewpoint that it's tethered to. So I find it a very very restless camera because she's restless. Charlotte in Lost in Translation is a bit floaty and wandering, but not really that energetic, so there's lots of gentler movements happening. The Beguiles, there's a lot of stillness and very precise, restrained movement because of what's going on in that situation, so it's tailored, I would say, to what's happening and who are you following.
So in this film, it's our main protagonist is somebody who does get the opportunity to party, and that partying is denoted by the film as being one way in which one can break out of the constraints which tend to be erected around women. In line with that, quite a high degree of camera movement, and also quite a celebrated messiness of camera movement, because we're not talking here about Steadicam shots or orchestrated dolly shots or really significant, gorgeous, scenic crane shots. We're talking about actual handheld camera in amongst party guests.
But you were noticing in the carriages as well. Well, the space is so small, it's impractical to do anything but have the operator in with handheld device. Also, you've got that constraint of a carriage, the small space. Often she's framed looking out the window, off daydreaming in her head somewhere. She's got very active imagination, and that's conveyed through the way that she's looking out the window and staring at things, the wandering of the camera. It's a space of transition. It's a transitory situation, being in the carriage, being taken from one place to another. When she is seen in a carriage, it's at quite big moments of her life.
She also, for a character who is, for a lot of this film, constrained within Versailles, has quite a few moments in which she's not. The opera, for example, seems to be one of her moments of liberation. And I suppose the ending of that liberation being symbolised by that last visit to the opera where no one else will applaud along with her. That symbolises the ending of her licence to get out of there. Now, we must acknowledge that so far we've had a lot of female characters whose psyche we've only had scraps of information about. Whereas in this one, we have actually seen an internally subjective scene because we saw a daydream of Marie Antoinette.
Definitely a daydream, but also sexual fantasy.
Yeah, it's that particular type of daydream.
It's
I suppose
specific.
calling it a daydream because I've got a student who's writing on daydreams at the moment and has cast his net quite wide as to what counts as a daydream. So this is when she thinks of Count Fersen.
Yes, and it's a pre-50 Shades little Jamie Dornan, and he doesn't have very many lines, but he delivers them with his own accent, which is lovely.
In what may very well have been the beginning of a process which made him get the role in 50 Shades, he did some sex.
And
it was quite
who
tasty.
can complain about that? Of course, I know him best from The Fall, where he's fearless. But yeah, really fascinating to see him that young. I suppose while we're on that, baby Tom Harding as well. So cute.
We noticed only after we'd watched The Virgin Suicides that a young Hayden Christensen was in that as well.
About that.
Everyone has to get the start somewhere. Still on nerd business, you observed that Sofia Coppola is quite fond of busy background diegetic sound. So in this one, there was lots of instances of characters whispering stuff to each other. Sometimes the people doing the whispering would be in on-screen space, but mostly it was off-screen sound. It was something that was just about audible to a character in the on-screen space. So it was whispering coming from just outside of the frame. There was a good few sound bridges as well, which is another instance of off-screen sound because it's non-simultaneous sound. So this is a busy soundscape. Diegetically, it's also, like everything we've seen so far by her, it's busy mise-en-scène. And of course here the intricate detail is clothes, including shoes which seem to have been done by Malone Blahnik, and food. That's one of the aspects of mise-en-scène is a lot of food. The stuff that would be put on the table for the meals for Louis Auguste and Marie Antoinette, both when they were the Dauphin and the Dauphine, and then when they were king and queen. Food which they didn't seem to be expected to even touch, which seemed to be edible but was there for decorative purposes. So there was a lot of food, sweet and savoury. The busyness of all of their clothes as well seemed to be a deliberate part of...
Fussiness, yes.
Yeah,
and drawing attention to it. I mean, even when she's getting fittings, she's got these prototypes with one sleeve is with frills and one is plain and slitted. And she's asking for opinions and what to get for the finished thing, and that she'll probably only wear once.
I was looking for a moment in the film where she learned that all of that frivolity was actually costing taxpayers money.
damaging the country.
But the film did two things about this. The first was it specified that while this was costing the taxpayer money, it wasn't actually the thing that caused the revolution. It was actually Louis' decision to send money to America.
Well, he seemed to not really be terribly in charge and allowed his advisors to convince him to do it. And then it was too far gone and he had to keep going. And it was anything to beat the Brits. Our own people can starve. The Brits have to have a lesson.
So it was a very passive decision. It wasn't made at all clear, but from the viewpoint of any United Statesian watching this is a film about an unacknowledged debt that the US has to a particular country in Europe for having achieved its independence.
I suppose then there's a really, because we're watching these in totally the wrong sequence, because of course the Beguiled would probably hark back to some of this. They're doing the French lessons, they're in the Deep South, the French heritage is all around them, the big house. There's probably a narrative to be drawn across Coppola's films with those sorts of issues, those larger historical, political things. The identity of the United States is in there somewhere.
All of that frivolity, it was deemed at points to be frivolity, but even when it was deemed to be not particularly harmful because much greater harms were being done by Louis' spending decisions.
It's one of those things where it didn't help either.
But it was overtly demarcated by the dialogue and the plot to be something that wasn't quite as bad as Louis' decision.
But it was her decisions, you know, the painting with the slogans across it, you know, Queen of Death. It was implying that the people were angry with her and her excess. She was the brunt of all the gossip, not him. She was the one who was getting called frigid, not that he was blowing his load too soon.
And Sofia Coppola made obviously a very clear decision to go, Marie Antoinette never said let them eat cake. They had Kirsten Dunst wearing completely alien makeup, seemingly wearing absolutely nothing at that moment, say that line, and then there was a cut to Marie Antoinette with no makeup on saying, no, I would never say that. So it was clearly, this was a fantasy shot. Somebody made that up shot. In addition to all of this excusing of the cost of her lifestyle, it's not something that traps her. The clothes and the hair and the cake and the shoes, there are things that entrap her, but the clothes and the hair and the cake and the shoes aren't one of the things that entrap her.
They're quite liberating for her. They're her means of expression.
And she can take them off. She has that voluntary ability to take them off, and then there's that period when she asks for a really simple dress.
Yes.
When she's not partying, and so she's got a simple white dress. She has her hair almost completely down. She's got just a little bit of it tied up at the back. Nothing in her hair, no makeup on, no silly shoes. She's not constrained by the bling. It's a thing she does for fun. And I think that idea of that's what femininity involves when it's unconstrained, maybe what is going on in all the films that we've seen so far, where when women don't enjoy femininity, it's because it's constrained. It's because the hair and the shoes and the bling,
it's dictated,
where that's forced upon them. Now, of course, this film is tremendously pastel, but not actually anywhere near as pastel as I expected it to be.
There's bold pinks, there's a few bold reds and dresses on background actors. There's some quite bold, dark blues and navies the odd time. You do get the black when she's in mourning.
Loads of black near the end, There's the scene after her birthday party where she and a bunch of friends go out and watch the sun come up. Because that was quite a green and blue scene. So there's lots of colours to offset all of this pastel stuff, but there is still a lot of pastel in there. While we're on that scene, this is in about 9 different ways a teen movie. Teen movie in the sense of being primarily about teen difference from simultaneously kids and adults. And for a film which is about a young mother, for it to also be a teen film is pretty...
I got that impression as well. It felt like there were moments of teen rebellion and her interests. There was a really fascinating tension between certainly being a woman in this world, and you've got particular duties and roles that you must perform. And you've lived your whole life knowing what those are, but you've also not been permitted to access the education you need to understand fully those roles. She's portrayed as a very caring character, very affectionate, and actually is a bit bothered by hearing that people are really suffering, and she's wondering, what can we do? She doesn't have the answers because she's lived in this vacuous world where she's not allowed to think about that. She's not allowed to have access to these people. She's kept away from them by all these levels of rank, which is demonstrated quite early on after the marriage. The ridiculousness of the ranks. She's kept so far from the people, but you get the impression that she actually does care, but she hasn't got the knowledge or the means to really do anything about it. Certainly the film portrays it as she doesn't necessarily know that the money is the people's money. She just thinks they're all wealthy.
This is connected to something in the Virgin Suicides, isn't it? What seems like an omniscient narrator camera, and therefore seems to have the ability to pop into other places and show us things that certain characters don't know about, turns out to actually be constrained, attached to a certain character. So in this case, it's Marie Antoinette. So if she doesn't know about what's happening in the slums of Paris, then the narrator's not going to know either. And this may be something which frustrates me, because there's no particular rule about cinema that says that cameras have to be able to go anywhere, that they have to be omnipresent. But I am so used to films where if there's something which is relevant to the action, the camera just shows you it. If it means editing from one country to another, if it means editing across thousands of miles of space, it'll do so because it's necessary to give a viewer understanding of overall causality. Coppola just doesn't do that. Coppola goes, no, I'm going to make my viewers experience the partial understanding of the world which my characters have. It's vexing, but it's not vexing in the sense of it's violating some fundamental rule. It's just going against a habit that a lot of us are quite used to.
Back to your point about it being a teen movie. So I kind of thought, well, there's little touches in there. When she's a mother and she's much older, she dyes her hair pink. I kind of felt like a lot of the time there's a girlish joy in things, and she almost verges into a punk sensibility. I noted down the splodge when she signs her name at the marriage. There's the writing that's very deliberate and slow, and her signature isn't as refined as Louis Auguste's. And then there's this big ink splodge at the end. So there's this messiness. There's a lack of care that comes with youth and devil may care attitude, and she goes in and she's happy and she tries to find joy in things, and it seems to beat her down quite a lot, but she keeps trying to find joy in things even when it's really up against her.
I made a list of teen things that some of our protagonists do in this, and these are at moments which are denoted by the film's narrative process as being moments of jubilation and happiness. There's doing drugs recreationally, including drugs that are snorted and those that are smoked. Low stakes gambling, so there's a bit of very fun playing of what seems to be craps at one point. Drinking exotic drinks, in this case it's champagne. The pair of Converse All-Stars, which we only see for 2 seconds. Taking joy in the real specifics of fashion.
And with hair and style.
Having a considered style. Enjoying the putting on of a particular look when one has a menu of looks to choose from. Playing what I like to call the Rizzler game, but which our listeners might not know as the Rizzler game, is one where you stick a piece of paper to your head and it's got someone's name on it.
Is it 20 questions?
I think it's a variation on 20 questions. I'm sure
because you have to guess who it is.
Maybe it's just called Who Am I? It's sometimes known as the Post-it note game. Banter between friends. Gallivanting with drinks through a place which is supposed to be quiet at night. So when they're going out into the gardens of Versailles, when it's supposed to be quiet and they're making noise, and they're doing horseplay that young adults and teenagers are experimenting with, will do something that's slightly violent, chasing each other around. The watching the sun come up scene, the last shot in that, where it's just the backs of the characters, and we can't see the sun, but we can see the reflection of it in a big long lake, and that's held for quite some time.
Like a big group of friends.
Recreational sex. So Marie Antoinette doesn't have any of that with her husband, but has some of it with
Jamie Dornan.
with Jamie. Going to the movies, I wrote, because the opera is the movies.
Well, it is. I mean, those moving backdrops are glorious.
And that one of those was clouds, wasn't it? The moving backdrops of the opera.
Gorgeous.
And then the bedroom hopping. That bit when there was lots of people.
They're all running
people
about.
of her
it's
generation.
Scooby-Doo in and out of different doors. That's brilliant.
Loads of teen business. So this is clearly in parts a teen film.
Yeah.
But then clearly in other parts, it's a film about the oddness of this particular period.
Yeah.
So it's flicking here and there between this is something which is basically happening in the 21st century and something which was, hey, how weird was it that people used to do this over 200 years ago?
There's that convergence of the teenage girl with the girl as monarch, because it's a girl in another way, which is coming through in Coppola's films quite a bit, of having zero control over the shape of her own life. In this case, it's probably really obvious to say, but it's worth saying anyway. It's the gilded cage. A super privileged person, but who has no say over. I mean, she's not allowed to feed her own baby daughter. She has to sneak out to go to the masked ball. She's not allowed to go to things like that.
And it's not that it's the king, and Louis by that point is king. It's actually no, he's not.
No, he's not, because
not quite yet.
the king is sick when they arrive back.
And it's not as if the Dauphin, Louis, is stopping her. It's that there's an institution that they're all part of. Presumably the king wouldn't really care. It's just there's an institution that they're all part of that means everyone goes, no, you're not allowed to do that. That's just a rule, even though no one actually ever wrote that rule down.
Yeah, she feels compelled to clap at the wonderful opera performers to show them that they're appreciated. That's not allowed. So there's all these things that feel intuitive to her she's not allowed to do, and that feels like a very general experience of being a teenage girl, but also a privileged teenage girl, as we've seen before. So Charlotte in Lost in Translation, the Lisbon sisters in Virgin Suicides, all of the girls and the women in The Beguiled, they've all come from privileged backgrounds, and yet their lives are so constrained and difficulties are caused for them and they can't fulfill their own potential.
I suppose a contrast between The Beguiled and Marie Antoinette may be revealing in that Marie Antoinette gets more moments of escape from that constraint than the characters in The Beguiled do.
Yes.
Even though this is significantly earlier historically. Now I suppose the difference there is in part to do with the overall aesthetic of the film, because in The Beguiled it seems to be going for historical realism, whereas this is going for postmodern bringing of the 1770s into the 21st century. Hence, not all of the non-diegetic music being late 20th, early 21st century music, but a lot of it being.
I find it comes in most after the Comtesse has her baby, because it was either instrumental or classical before that, but after that, well, actually there's I Want Candy earlier on. It's more noticeably contemporary music all the way after the Comtesse has her baby.
Well, even before the Comtesse has a baby, it's subtly contemporary in that where the norm with a piece of historical fiction is that you use both instruments and pieces of music roughly from the period. It was using more recent instruments such as
guitars and drums, wasn't there? And
the standard equipment of a modern rock band, even if it was playing pieces of classical music. And also there was occasions when the music wasn't very clearly late 20th, early 21st century music with lyrics, for example, but it would be a classical orchestra produced version of a tune that sounded really familiar from the late 20th century. So
I think it's important probably to note as well at this point as Marianne Faithfull playing Marie Antoinette's mother.
In fact, when one is Sofia Coppola, one seems to have the ability to get a lot of people to say, yes, I will be in your film, including Rip Torn and Steve Coogan in this particular one. I've also just looked up the actress playing Marie-Thérèse, Marie Antoinette's first daughter. Her name is Lauriane Mascaro, presumably French. Another postmodern aspect of this is just it being okay that sometimes characters are speaking French and most of the time they're not, and they're speaking English in an American accent.
Yeah, I think on the experiences of girlhood, to revisit that a bit, because this keeps getting stronger the more of the films that we see. There's all these tiny girls. Were they part of the ladies in waiting? Were they attendants? All these little children in the lavish dresses on both sides, and so many huge dresses on these tiny little bodies, and the exaggerated womanliness of the, what do you call those, crinolines under the dresses, the big ones on the hips. It's not bustle.
I think it's
is it?
bustle when it's on your bum.
But these are on the hips.
Yeah, these things that make you look
sides.
a lot wider than you actually are. Yeah.
Because I couldn't help thinking about Sally Potter's Orlando and Tilda Swinton when Orlando changes sex and goes from being a man to a woman. I think it's the 18th century, and she's so restricted and constrained by these huge dresses and this ridiculous stuff that just dwarf her body, but also she struggles to get past all of the furniture in the stately home. It was reminding me of that actually, as to how difficult it is to move in these things, and yet they're all very animated. There's quite a lot of running about, whether it's to tell someone about a death or it's to run to someone that you're excited to see, or you're running after children, or just running about with friends, being animated at the parties, whatever it happens to be. Even though there's constriction, maybe it's Kirsten Dunst, I don't know. There was just something almost natural about her wearing those dresses. You know, it just seemed like it works for her. It doesn't take Marie Antoinette long to get new girl companions around her, so she has to leave her friends from Austria behind. She is shed of Austria entirely at the border.
And we see her naked in quite a few different ways, without ever actually seeing that kind of frontal nudity, which makes it feel like you've seen something you shouldn't. And I suppose what we get in there is a sense of exposure that she's feeling, because she's often just naked in front of other people.
Lots of other people.
There's a sense in this that one thing that Marie Antoinette does well is she just automatically acquires groups of friends roughly her own age with whom she has meaningful relationships, even though they may be little characterised and even though they may not get much screen time. That's still something which people of Marie Antoinette's age just automatically do. Someone who's late teenage, early 20s just automatically does, as far as Coppola is concerned. On the magic hour, or is it called the golden hour? That hour when the sun's going down and everything looks kind of orange. There was bits of the Virgin Suicides that were filmed at that hour, and specifically with the sun in the background of scenes, so that there'd be a lot of haze, strong light source in the background, lens flare, therefore overexposure, and a sense of more of this, the presence of the camera cinematography. In this, she managed to do it at the dawn golden hour as well, because usually it's the one in the evening, but no, we had a bit at dawn here. So there's quite a few instances of the sun just being a big warm ball off in the distance. Now normally, for the majority of the day, if there's no cloud cover, if you point the camera at the sun, it's a huge, blinding, white mass of way too much light. You're filming a star, right? Generally, that's a really bad thing to do. As anyone who's looked at the sun during the day will know, but there seems to be a fondness for when it's safe to look at it. So there's this dangerous thing that's always around, which Sofia Coppola seems to want to get when it's at its tame point, the beginning at the end of the day. And it does lead to some very warm shots, of course, shots where people are bathed in this gentle light, very orange light. And it also leads to haze. There's haze in quite a few of these shots. She does like to shoot at dawn, even when she's not shooting the sun, just to shoot the kind of mist that you tend to get at dawn. And also, she's quite fond of the odd bit of soft focus. And of course, it's very slight soft focus as well, so as not to look like it's filmed through someone's misty eyes, but it's just supposed to look just slightly ethereal. These are things that we're noticing consistently across her films. And I suppose since we're sitting here looking at the point in the credits where all of the titles of the music that was used in this film are listed, and it includes music by New Order, The Cure, performed at least by Bow Wow Wow, Aphex Twin, Adam and the Ants, Air, The Strokes, Jean-Philippe Rameau. The type of music, regardless of what type of music we're getting, the music is conspicuous. Coppola characteristic number 3, I suppose. Her non-diegetic music is conspicuous. It has, I wrote in my notes at least, it takes on at least part of a narrator function. So it's as if a band has been called on to come in and sing the part of a narrator, or just emote musically the part of a narrator for a couple of minutes. And I suppose the most conspicuous moment of that was about halfway through, when it was, well, I suppose there's 2 of them, but I think probably the most conspicuous one was Bow Wow Wow's version of Fools Rush In, which I gather was written possibly by Evan James from 1980, when
It was in the carriage.
Yes.
After she'd met the Count, what's his face? Count Jamie Dornan.
We'll just call him that from now on.
I noted that down because she's staring out the carriage window and you could see that she's thinking about him and she's doing the obsessing over a boy teen thing.
We might as well at that point have a narrator saying, this is going to be a silly thing that she's going to do and it may have negative consequences, but what the hell, I think she should probably do it anyway. It'll be fun while it lasts. We might as well have a narrator say that, given that it's got a rendition of at least half of a piece of popular music saying that.
Bow Wow Wow was used as well. It's I Want Candy.
I called that bit the music video bit.
It is, yeah, because it's lots of very short shots of shoes and it's quite animated. It's kind of like stop motion stuff with the shoes, all these different shoes.
And exactly the same with cake.
And the
as
cake
well.
and the moet as well.
Yeah.
The moet. The moe.
Yeah, and so when you have shots that have that brief duration and the only thing that's changing the shot is a cake has been replaced with a different cake, it makes it look like the cakes are moving or that they're magically transforming from one cake into another. So
and there's all this grabbing them and eating them messily and they're getting all over the face. It's very excessive. And I think that comes at a moment not long after the moment where she goes into the room and cries alone. And of course she's not alone because this camera's right up her face and we're in there with her. So she never really gets peace from being stared at and talked about. That part with the shoes, by association in the editing, it's just like, well, screw yous all, I'm going to have a laugh, I'm going to eat cake, I'm going to wear and buy extravagant shoes, I'm going to drink, I'm going to have a good time.
And one of her more meaningful relationships seems to be with her tailor.
The wonderful James Lance, who I haven't seen in anything for ages. Is he, he's the wig maker as well. Does he do both?
That is who I meant, but I don't know whether he's the wig maker or the tailor.
Maybe he was doing the whole lot, like the general outfitting or something.
Doing the air kissing and the helping her by not letting her hair go on fire.
There was lots of whispering at the scenes he's in where it's, I think he likes boys. I'm not sure if it was about him or it was about Louis Auguste, but there was something very early on about him being around the stable boy.
There were so many characters in this that sometimes it just wasn't clear who was talking about who, particularly as everyone was wearing the same wigs.
The whispering was not attached to mouths saying the words. It was all just sort of idle gossip. It was almost overbearing at times, but it's just woven through the whole thing, and it's peripheral and central at the same time.
The masked ball scene was quite meaningful because if one overlooks the fact that she wears a mask that means that it's still completely possible for people to identify her, and people do identify her at the ball, she still nonetheless seems to be treated like she's just another member of the aristocracy rather than, at that point, a princess or the Dauphine. It seems to be liberating to get out, and the thing that she seems to at least symbolically have is some anonymity, and that's what she's not had so far, and that's been her biggest problem. Even though actually maybe it's her second biggest problem, because her first biggest problem is one that happens early on, which is where she can't get pregnant. And
she
I suppose
can get pregnant, her husband won't go anywhere near her.
That's the thing, the film has her deemed by those around her to be incapable of getting pregnant, where actually it's just that her husband won't have sex with her.
When all the pressure's on her from all sides, it's all on her. You have to make yourself attractive to him, you have to be imaginative in the bedroom, and she's trying her best and he's just not interested at all. I
think the phrasing of the letter from her mother refers to her failure to inspire passion in her husband. And what can you do if he's not interested? He's not interested. And he knows as well as anybody that he has to produce a male heir. But it's all on her. That's her only purpose in life, is to produce the male heir. On to the moment when that is solved, which was interestingly done, because Marie Antoinette's brother, who by that point is the Emperor of Austria, he comes to visit. He has a bit of a chat with her. They have a very friendly relationship. He's not dominating of her at all. And then he realises he has to go and have a word with Louis, and then it becomes clear to him that actually Louis just doesn't know what to do, which hadn't occurred to me. I would have thought what they're doing here is they're just making out that of course he's gay and he's going to try to not have sex with a woman. Okay, fine. But no, he just doesn't know what to do. So our main female protagonist's brother has a word with our main female protagonist's husband and equips him with the knowledge to do some sex. It's a slightly incestuous moment because she indirectly gets impregnated by her own brother. And in addition, this conversation between the two men occurs off screen because we only see the beginning of that conversation,
With the
just as
elephant.
they're launching into it. Yeah, but during that beginning of the conversation, it's done when they're visiting an elephant in the grounds of Versailles, which seems to live in this little enclosure. An elephant which has a very wandering and prehensile trunk.
And the actors did beautifully with it, especially Jason Schwartzman, because it was having a really good sniff at him.
It was poking around his face and his
really
chest.
all over him, and he really dealt with it beautifully.
I wrote very early on children and animals in my
loads
notes because
everywhere.
Sofia Coppola seems to have gone, okay, we're going to do this filming which involves lots of rehearsal. And at one point there was clearly the day when they did all the dog rehearsal and everyone got the dogs comfortable with them. And there must have been the day when they got the elephant comfortable with them. The symbol of the heterosexual, it turns out, libido of Louis Auguste at the time. Actually, is he king by that point? It's a blur. She'll have a better recollection of the film we've just seen. Anyway, of Louis Auguste, Louis. The symbol of his sexual awakening is a tame elephant. It's as if his elephant needs to realise that it's still an elephant even though it's grown up in captivity and that it can do rather interesting things with its trunk. Hardly subtle metaphors, but who ordered subtle metaphors? This film did not order subtle metaphors, it ordered entertaining metaphors.
And it's a certificate 12 actually, and all the other films we've seen by Coppola have been 15, so it's a bit lighter and it's having quite jovial fun with a lot of issues. Why not that as well? I suppose with the daughter, I mean, we can only assume that it was King Louis's son. I mean, there has been all the business with Count Jamie Dornan.
Count Fairzen.
Not that it matters. It's not like he's taking the throne.
This brings us on, I suppose, to this film's ending, where the very last shot of the film is not of them being driven away to be imprisoned in the... I've never known how to pronounce this. Tuileries or Tuileries? Anyway, the place where they're going to be imprisoned in Paris. It's the wreckage of Marie Antoinette's bedroom with nobody in it on the day after the Palace of Versailles has been stormed by the crowd from Paris. This is a film about some people who are going to be tried by the provisional government of the revolution and are going to be executed, as far as I'm aware. And yet the film just goes, you know what, I don't think we're going to dwell on that part of this light-hearted story. We'll just show you a bit more beautiful, if at this point somewhat destroyed, Versailles bling.
The moments before that, it's the carriage. And it seems to replay. I don't know if that was meant to replay, but they're in the carriage and Marie Antoinette is staring at Versailles and the sunrise, I think it is. Louis XVI says something to her. I actually didn't pick it up, but she says, no, I'm saying goodbye. But they're actually almost coming out of view of it. There's a shot where they're looking back at it diagonally and they're almost out of view of it. But then the next shot, it goes back again. They're about halfway across.
Right, yeah.
With the viewpoint, and it plays again with her just looking at it.
There is, I suppose, some analysis to be done on whether the cinematography thinks that the Palace of Versailles is gorgeous. There's several moments when it's filmed through Marie Antoinette's childish wonder at the place, but then it's possible to film stuff in such ways to point out, at least to imply, that it's a rather hostile environment. One way of making an environment look hostile is if you're constantly showing the ceiling. It tends to make it look oppressive and slightly deranged. So we're getting bits of ceiling, but actually most of those ceiling shots was a way of showing gorgeous chandeliers.
Yeah.
And then there was loads of very distant shots of huge outdoor environments at Versailles as well, including huge outdoor stairs and then huge elements of the landscaping outside. And those did seem to just be going pretty gorgeous here, isn't it? And maybe this was actually filmed at the Palace of Versailles, which would involve a lot of permissions and a lot of money. And so maybe there were conditions on how they were permitted to show it.
But also it's hostile in that she's always cold. She's used to being in a warm, comfortable environment, but she's always cold. She's not allowed to keep around her the things that she wants. She's got everything either taken away from her or they won't let her keep it. They won't let her have it in the first place. And even her first breakfast there, they take the water away again. They won't let her just have it with her on the table. You have to whisk everything away. So she's hungry, she's cold. They keep her standing naked for ages while they go through all the ranks of the dressers.
Just to flesh it out, the system that the head of the house describes is where the most senior ranking person in the room is the one who puts the dress on the Dauphine. But if someone's in the middle of doing that and someone enters the room who is of a higher rank than the person doing it, they all have to stop, and then the new person will come in and take over doing it. And that happens twice when someone's in the middle of doing it, and so for much longer than necessary, Marie Antoinette's just standing there naked waiting for people to put clothes on her.
In a very large, cold room.
And this is also Kirsten Dunst just being naked in front of a lot of other fully clothed performers as well. Kudos to her. She was tremendously game in doing this, and also doing lots of rather cheeky grinning at the time, seemingly going, this is quite fun.
She's got this girlish wonder about her, and she plays the character as having a pretty gung-ho attitude to stuff. There's a lot of her being bored and lying around and fantasizing about things, and you see her boredom, and there's a lot of animation in the stillness of her being bored. You can see her imagining these adventures that she's going on, but at the same time, when the chips are down, she is calm, she knows what to do, she has the children under control, she's telling everybody to be calm, it's going to be okay, I'm staying here, this is her duty. She steps up, and when she has stuff to do, she seems to be really happy and in control of things. She comes across, certainly the characters in this film, how true it is, we don't know, but she comes across as a much more organised, together, thoughtful person than her husband, the king.
And I suppose the point of the film is to say, the things that you think you know about Marie Antoinette, well, let's just take all of those and sling those out, shall we? Even if what we're being shown is still a complete fiction, we're just being invited to no longer think those things we thought about.
Just to think a bit differently about history. Women are very often written out of histories, and if they're kept in histories, they're to blame for everything. It's all their fault, even though they weren't allowed to do anything about it. So there's a sort of redressing of that, even if we don't know how accurate anything is. It's just a possibility of, imagine that it wasn't all her fault. Imagine that it's all a bit more complicated, that this is a human being too, and it's all a bit more complicated. And yes, she's super privileged, but she didn't have it easy either. Coppola's films keep giving us these very difficult things to discuss. It's hard to know where you sit, really. But I think it's worth pointing out as well, one of the lines from Louis XVI was, "I won't be a fugitive king." And yet the whole time he's been a very absent king from his own country. He hasn't really engaged with the issues at hand in France. He's allowed himself to be more concerned with what's going on in America.
And this is just the fact that he virtually never leaves Versailles is mentioned at several points, and Versailles itself is a good 20 miles away from the centre of Paris. It's there specifically for the French royalty to get away from the city, which is the capital of the country that they rule. He's one of several generations of French monarchs who doesn't want to live in the capitals.
They're not part of everything. Whereas Marie Antoinette keeps asking to go to Paris. She wants to be in the middle of it. She wants to be involved. She wants to be in Paris culture. She wants to be around people. She wants to see it. This is not her country, but it's become her country, and I get the feeling as well that she would have liked to have been off adventuring around France a bit more.
That sense of restlessness is also communicated through this thing which Coppola does in everything we've seen so far by her, and it's jump cutting in scenes when characters are bored. So if a character's just lying alone on a bed in a room, we'll have 4 shots, each of which is only held for about 3 or 4 seconds, and those 4 shots are from across perhaps an hour of time. So edit between A and B, between B and C, between C and D is an edit jumping forwards 20 minutes, and it's emphasised through having an edit from where the viewpoint is exactly the same in shot A and shot B, but the character's moved a bit, or it's 2 slightly different viewpoints of the character seemingly not having moved at all. Jump cutting is a way of giving these films pace, but also it's a way of indicating the restlessness of protagonists.
There's a bit where she performs for everybody. She's got her own little house and farm set up, and she seems to be off recovering. That's her escape from Versailles, which is the escape from the city, which she's not really allowed to go to. When she sort of does her own opera, she's performing as a lowly housewife. I wonder how much that's an imaginary of her playing out a fantasy of being a normal woman.
It's a lowly housewife who works in a small farm, I think, as well.
Seems to be. She was ironing. There's parts when you see her, she asks to be excused from a gathering, and she's granted permission from her husband husband, and she just flops on the bed. You can just see her. Kirsten Dunst acts very well, just lying fantasizing about stuff. Her face acting is superb during that, because you can really see what she's doing. Because of that scene where she's playing this housewife, you wonder, well, it's not necessarily always that she's fantasizing about the Count or any other man. She could be fantasizing about a different life. This makes me think as well about the girls in the Virgin Suicides, because that was also their freedom, was where they could go in their own minds. And of course Lux, Kirsten Dunst's character, hers seems to be the most vivid of that.
The difference between a film where we get to actually see what someone's imagining and a film where the film's implicit narrative process just goes, no, I'm not going to show you what they're imagining. That's the difference here, isn't it, between Virgin Suicides and Marie Antoinette. But I suppose, yeah, in both, it's the same performer playing a character of roughly the same age, within about 10 years of each other, clearly with an active imagination. This is the constant across these films. Do you think this film pardons the royal family and the aristocracy? Because there are, early on, the older generation are gossipy and they're vicious, but then that seems to be taken over by a younger bunch who are friends with Marie Antoinette and who seem to be nicer and less gossipy. And then in other respects, the king is quite brave and quite benign. There's no indication that he ever does anything with the military to try and put down the revolution. Just goes, okay, yeah, fine, you people are angry, I'm sure you can take us away now.
They seem to accept that they maybe haven't done things quite right, and this is inevitable, they're going to be taken away. I don't know how relevant this is, but another moment that reminded me a bit of Orlando, there's a part where quite late on, Marie Antoinette is dressed in quite dark clothes and she's walking through the gardens. The trees are sculpted in these cone shapes, and her dress she basically looks like a moving tree because she's exactly the same tone and shape of them. I was wondering about, is that her embedded in Versailles now? Is that she's part of this place, she's part of the furniture kind of? And what might that mean? So that could be something worth teasing out a little bit more. And then it's not long after that the crowds arrive and you hear them quite a lot before you actually see anybody. And then of course you don't even see faces, you see sort of backs of heads and out of focus fire and pitchforks.
That cliche and that lack of attention to the humanity of the people in this crowd of starving people, it did seem to go, aren't these revolutionaries rather mean to be protesting absolute monarchy?
Because she does come out and bows to them.
It seems to be one of those scenes where somebody recorded what actually happened and there's an attempt to try and completely recreate what actually happened, but what it means is really vague as a consequence. Is this her saying, hey guys, whatever I did, I'm sorry, and I'm sure that there's lots of misunderstandings involved and let's talk and I'm sure we can sort this out? Or is it her going, I have a completely misguided way of how I need to handle this and I'll give it a go, and oh look, it didn't work, and revolution. There
is reference to the king and queen being quite gormless. They don't really know what they're doing. But then it feels like anybody, any successor to any state, it feels like, well, surely they inherited a lot of these problems. There's a line when Louis XVI, just before he's getting crowned, he says, God help us, we're too young to rule. They know they're inexperienced to this. He knows he's not ready, he's not prepared. I mean, he's only just figured out how to have sex, for goodness sake. He can't run a country.
One step at a time.
Yeah, I think it does invite sympathy for certain. Dealing with a revolution is very difficult, because it does involve brutal murder of quite a lot of people, including small children, which is very disturbing. It still terrifies me that one of these, certainly the Russian Revolution in the 20th century, I mean, reading about it happening in the 18th century is bad enough, but you feel like, well, more barbaric times, because there's that distance from history. But 100 years ago feels a bit soon. Yes, huge problems, but murdering children surely is not a solution to the sorts of problems that a country is facing, and I really have difficulty with those things.
I think part of the logic of why the whole of the Romanov family were killed, rather than just the Tsar and the Tsarina, was if they left left anyone alive, there might be a remote chance that somebody would try and reinstall that person as a monarch later on. So the idea was they felt they had to destroy the possibility of the monarchy ever continuing, which is why, looking at the various lists of characters in the film, the future monarchs are from the first one to give birth, the Comtesse. They're the ones who survive, and later on are the post-revolutionary monarchs, including Charles X. But the film seems to... It goes into that entirely new context of the revolution in the last few minutes, having made the film very little about anything relevant to the revolution for the vast majority of the time. Suddenly it's just a film
very distant,
where these characters are thrown into a completely new situation.
I would say that's probably what it's trying to convey, is that this blindsided them because they were having a great time and, oh, real stuff's happening. Okay.
And that could be seen as a way of criticising our main protagonist, even though for the majority of the film our main protagonist has been shown to be a victim who, when she does get free, doesn't do anybody any harm and generally tends to please the people around her.
I think it depicts her as being damned if she does and damned if she doesn't. One example of that is she's criticised constantly on all sides for her expenditure, but there is some of the gossip that I heard that wasn't connected to faces or mouths at the time. It was off screen. Included criticism for her not buying new dresses. She'd started to wear the same dresses over and over, and she was getting criticised for that in her court. So what's she supposed to do? It's quite extravagant having her own little farm, but she's self-sufficient. She's making her own food. Obviously a lot of servants are doing the work. She's serving milk to her friends. The Queen of France is serving food and drink to her friends. She's gathering her own eggs with her child. She's teaching her child, the Dauphine, to be self-sufficient as well. So she's actually, in a way, depicts her as doing probably morally the right thing, or at least a better thing than what she was doing for a long time. And then she's getting criticised in her own court for not wearing a different lavish dress every day anymore.
For that reforming the way the royal household works, the film seems to say, yes, here's a thing for which this historical character should be credited. There's an attempt to try and reboot the historical memory of Marie Antoinette here. Even though the film's so very postmodern in going, this could be about any teen rebellion. It's a mixture of an attempt at historical realism with a fantastical story about something that doesn't really happen at any time.
I suppose just one last point is so much of the film sees her idling away time, and then towards the end of the film when things are escalating, she's out of time. Do you have anything you want to sum up with?
I think we've come up with quite a detailed list of Coppola-isms. Or what do we call them? Do we call them Coppola-isms because now she's the Coppola? Or do we call them Sofia Coppola-isms and therefore have to refer to Francis Ford Coppola-isms when we're distinguishing? So S Coppola-isms.
Does he have particular, I suppose he would do, particular traits?
He has a particular flavour, yes. Right, so our Sofia Coppola set of thematic and stylistic signature traits is quite detailed by now. It includes stuff about colour, shot duration, editing structures, attitude towards protagonists and so on.
And Sarah Flack again as editor.
Oh yeah, I suppose if we refer to Sofia Coppola, what we mean is Coppola, stroke Dunst, stroke Flack, etc. Person and their preferred team. Girlhood is simultaneously a position of enforced disempowering behaviours and a life period of natural or intrinsic behaviours which it is possible to oppress or limit. So there's these two girlhoods going on at the same time and have been going on at the same time in all of her films. This is very specific Coppola-ism. The particular interaction between non-diegetic sound and story space, such that it has a narrational dimension at points, really detailed, busy mise-en-scène as well as quite busy diegetic soundscapes. I would be game to have 4 films put before me, one of which is Sofia Coppola's next film, with all the credits stripped out of both films, and see if I can figure out which of them is a Coppola film. Although, of course, signatures develop and they are relatively loose anyway, as my rather cack-handed observations about camera movement have indicated. overall, it's a film that I have been conscious of not having watched for over a decade now, because when it came out, it was conspicuously marketed. It was something which had a very particular flavour to it in trailers and posters, and attracted a lot of discussion by reviewers, and I just never got around to seeing it. So I now feel like I've made up for something which I should have done years ago but didn't. I'm glad I've seen it, even though one of the feelings I tend to get at the end of Coppola films is, wow, it was long, even though it was less than 2 hours.
That one was just shy of 2 hours, whereas the other ones have been sort of more around 90, 100 minutes.
Yeah, so they're not particularly long films. They just feel long because they have a rather slow pace to them. That's all. And, I've got to get used to this because not everything is a Marvel film.
As we opened with, I think on that marketing, because I vaguely remember it being marketed, and certainly any subsequent discussions around it gave me the impression that it was a punk rock version of the Marie Antoinette story. I don't know why I didn't really... I think probably I'd seen Lost in Translation and I wasn't super impressed. I just wasn't really paying attention to Sofia Coppola around then. I think probably it's good watching them now because I'm able to appreciate what's going on, even though I feel fairly undecided. We finished these viewings of her films and I'm really glad I've seen it, but I'm not in a hurry to watch it again.
Lost in Translation, Beguiled, Virgin Suicides, Marie Antoinette. I'm keen to watch them again in order to do stylistic shot analysis of them, rather than that thing you get where you walk out of a film and you go, I could go straight back in right now, and might. But, that's not to say that she's a bad filmmaker or anything. It just means that these are kind of films which you need to spend quite a while digesting before you can get them out.
As we've been raising, they're problematic. There's issues around our depictions of race. It was interesting in this, there was the odd token black person in the background actors, the piano teacher.
One of the people in the court.
That's not particularly likely, is it?
Well, people of recent African origin being in Europe at the time, there were actually quite a significant proportion of them already living in Europe at the time. We're quite inclined to go, that's a late 20th century thing, but no, it was already the case. People of recent African origin having significant social status at the time.
That's it.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's the unlikely part. We haven't read the biography that it's based on. Maybe these particular figures are actually based on real people. For certain, there was a little point where one of the characters had a black page boy. That was an 18th century fashion statement.
Isn't there a lot of erasure around those histories as well?
You tend to find mentions of them in the occasional portrait, or the fact that in quite a few towns in the UK there's a road called Black Boy Road. I used to live very near a Black Boy Road in Exeter. I learned at Exeter University that the reason it was called Black Boy Road is because an 18th century thing was in areas where there's high concentrations of shops. Shops would, of course, have a boy whose job it was to deliver your goods after you'd bought them. In areas where there's high concentrations of shops which had young ex-slave Africans working, the road would get the nickname Black Boy Road, and in some cases it stuck. And so there's Black Boy Roads around the country. There's tiny little places where the history of people of recent African origin living and working around Europe well before the era of mass migration, there's not much of those histories left. So yeah, one of the things that we could say makes this quite a postmodern film is that it tries to redress imbalances in historiography in historical fiction. Although another way that we call it a postmodern film is that it does seem to give two V's to the idea of historical verisimilitude, hence the Converse All-Stars and the Malone O'Blahniks. I think perhaps Coppola characteristic number 8 is films with multiple statuses rolled together, where it flicks quickly between them from one scene to the next. Your final thoughts, Dr. Blair?
I suppose quite keen now to go on to Somewhere and The Bling Ring.
If only because then we can say that we've both watched the entire output to date of one commercial feature film director. I don't think I can say that about anyone. Could you say that about anyone? Have you watched all Hitchcocks?
No, quite a lot of them. I think there's quite a lot of filmmakers I'm a big fan of, but I've maybe not seen one or two of their earliest films. I'm wondering if I've seen all of Christopher Nolan. No, I haven't. No, I've seen a lot of his early stuff, but I haven't seen everything he's done. What's the one about the magician?
The Prestige.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
I might have seen all of Christopher Nolan's films.
Have you seen Following?
I haven't seen all of Christopher Nolan's films.
That was his first feature film. I taught it one time. It was interesting, and there's allusions to Batman and stuff in it.
Are you suggesting our next season?
No. I can't sit through Dunkirk again. It's too tense.
We
I thought my
need to-
heart was going to explode.
We needed to lie down for several days after seeing that.
I think we just had a drink and a days after that.
But it was enjoyable.
And I'm not a fan of Christopher Nolan, really. I enjoyed watching Inception. I went to the cinema to see that and I enjoyed it, but I've never felt compelled to watch it again.
I have several times because of the gorgeous stuff it does with time. Okay, so we will be back to Sofia Coppola's output sometime soon.
You've been listening to Audiovisual Cultures with me, Paula Blair, and Andrew Shail. This episode was recorded and edited by Paula Blair, and the music is Common Ground by Airtone, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 and available for download from ccmixter.org. If you like the show and find its contents useful and interesting, please help cover production and distribution costs by donating to paypal.me/PEA Blair and liberapay.com/PEA Blair. Episodes are released every other Wednesday. Please rate, share and subscribe on your chosen listening platform, as this helps others find the show. For more information, visit audiovisualcultures.wordpress.com and follow AV Cultures on Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for listening and catch you next time.